Hello everybody and welcome to Books with Ike. My name is Isaac and today I'm going to be talking about every book that I read in March. Now I read 10 books in March, literally who am I? To be fair, 3 of them were graphic novels, but still, 7 books is not bad. So I'm just going to get on into it. The first book I read in March was Saga Volume 4 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. And the second was Volume 5. I've talked about Saga multiple times before on this channel, but if you don't know what it's about 2 members of warring races who fall in love and have a kid, and everyone else wants them dead. So, I gave Volume 4 4 stars. It had some interesting character and plot development, and it introduced some cool new characters, and it finally answered some world-building questions that I've been wondering about since the first volume, so that was good. But I don't really have anything else to say about it. It was just solid. And I gave Volume 5 5 stars. Again, it had some interesting character and plot development, it continued with the world building, and the plot of this book is crazy. But these 2 volumes have made me aware of a sort of structural problem with the story. I can't really say what I mean by that because it's spoilers. But basically, this series has the repeated use of a trope, which I find very annoying, and I'm just going to leave it at that. The next book I read in March was Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, and this is the first book in the Last Hours series, which is part of the overall Shadowhunter Chronicles. The Last Hours follows the children of the characters from the Infernal Devices series, and this book in particular follows a character called Cordelia Carstairs, who moves to London and attempts to ingratiate herself with powerful Shadowhunters for political reasons. And just as Cordelia arrives in London, a new type of demon appears, which has the ability to walk in daylight and carries a deadly plague. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I think I might drop it down to just 4. Something weird about this is I didn't really get emotionally invested in the characters, and the reason that's weird is because there have been short stories about these characters, and I have cared about them then. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the characters and I like them and I think they're well written, but for some reason I just didn't really care about them in this book. The one exception to that is Alistair Carstairs, who is definitely my favourite character in this series, and also one of my favourites of all of Cassandra Clare's characters now. The plot was really interesting, it had some great action scenes, and it also had some great character moments, I'm not going to deny that. But I thought the climax of this book was a bit rushed, and I thought that the ending was a bit dragged out. That seems like a contradiction in terms, but I promise you it's not. But overall I did enjoy this, and I am looking forward to the next book. After that, I read The Shadowhunters Codex by Cassandra Clare and Joshua Lewis, and this was a reread for me, and I started reading this just after Teeth, because I knew that Chain of Gold was coming out on March the 3rd, and I didn't want to start a new novel, which I would have to finish before reading that. So I just started this because I felt that it was something that I wouldn't have to finish in one sitting. So I read it in between reading bits of Chain of Gold and the next book I'm going to talk about. And this book is basically just an encyclopedia on the Shadowhunter world. So I enjoyed this book, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This was a reread, but I had forgotten most of the information in here, and I thought the information that is provided was really interesting. And I find the deadpan humour of the narration really funny, and the notes and interjections from the characters were occasionally funny, or occasionally provided some more insight into it, particularly whenever Clary had to ask Luke about something. There's also, like, loads of just incredible artwork throughout, let me find some, such as this. But this book does lose points for continuity errors. For example, this book refers to the existence of an unseelie queen, whereas in the rest of the Shadowhunter Chronicles, there is no such thing. The next book I read in March was At the Edge of the Universe by Sean David Hutchinson. And Sean David Hutchinson wrote one of my favourite books, We Are the Ants. And if this book is anything to go by, he's probably going to become one of my favourite authors, because I love this one as well. So this is about a boy called Ozzy, whose boyfriend disappears, and Ozzy is the only one who can remember he ever existed. And meanwhile, the universe is shrinking. So this covers a lot of the same topics and elements as We Are the Ants. It's a heavy contemporary with a sci-fi twist. It has a main character who other people think is weird. It deals with topics of mental illness and sexual assault and also abuse. But it does so in a way that doesn't feel like it's just repeating the same story as We Are the Ants. It feels fresh and new. And like where We Are the Ants, I feel, is written with a sort of hopeful overtone, this one is very much based on doubt and uncertainty. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really liked the main characters of this book, but I really didn't like Ozzy's parents. I found them really terrible, honestly. And I was sometimes irritated by Lua. The writing itself is great and it hooked me from the first page, and I was really interested in the mystery of what was happening and how it would resolve. So I also found the ending slightly disappointing, but not enough to have a significant impact on my enjoyment of the book. But obviously this is a pretty heavy book, so I'll give warnings for a lot of sexual assault, sexual abuse of a minor, self-harm, child abuse. But if you can handle all that, then I definitely recommend it. And after that I read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Elias Sainz. At least I hope that's how you pronounce his name. So this book is a bit hard to give a synopsis for. It's very slice of life. But it's about a boy called Aristotle who has no friends and then befriends someone called Dante. And Ari's dad was in the Vietnam War and never talks about it. And his parents also never talk about his brother, who is in prison, for reasons that Ari doesn't know. I thought this was amazing. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I found Ari to be a very relatable character, and he is a very beautiful portrayal of repressed queerness. And the way that that is, worked into the narrative is so incredibly clever and subtle, but it's also not subtle at the same time. It's kind of hard to describe. And it's also just a really incredible portrayal of how keeping secrets and bottling up your emotions damages you. And this book actually made me cry, which doesn't often happen. So, major respect for any book that can do that. The writing style has this sort of lazy, dreamlike quality to it that I really appreciated. The dialogue, to begin with, is a little bit stilted and unrealistic, but once you get used to it, that stops being a problem. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it. And after that, I read Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And this was a hugely popular book last year, but if you don't know what it's about the son of the President of the United States falling in love with the Prince of Wales. I love this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really loved the characters. Alex in particular is an incredible protagonist, and he's really likeable and easy to root for, but at the same time very flawed in a lot of ways. Again, Alex is also an incredible representation of repressed queerness, which is sort of a theme with the end of this wrap-up, as you'll see later. I thought the romance in here was incredibly sweet and at times quite steamy. And I really loved the way that the politics was worked into the plot, particularly the ideas of homophobia and being in the public eye and invasion of privacy, and I thought that was all handled really well. I did have a couple of problems with the way that Henry was characterized, because he reads a lot like an American stereotype of what a British royal would be. For example, he doesn't know that Tricky Dick is Nixon, whereas even normal British people know that, and someone in a position of political importance would definitely have been taught about this. And I feel like Americans probably assume that we know less about American history than we do, because they're not taught much about British history, but American authors should really do their research about this stuff before they put it into their books, because it just comes off as them not knowing anything about Britain. And Henry should have also known how to eat barbecue. I mean, come on. And I also had a bit of a problem with the stereotypical portrayal of the dynamics of Alex and Henry's relationship. And I go into more detail about that in my Goodreads notes, which I will link in the description. But that's all I'll say about that. And after that I read the Mortal Instruments graphic novel, Volume 1, by Cassandra Clare and Cassandra Jean. And I picked this up on a whim, and it was another reread for me. So this follows the story of the first book in the Mortal Instruments series, City of Bones, and it's about a girl called Clary Frey, who sees things that no one else can. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It is a lot better than I remember it being, but it's still not great. I think it's too fast-paced, it cuts out a lot of my favourite scenes and favourite lines, and I don't feel like the scene that's added in fits organically into the story. But I do really enjoy Cassandra Jean's artwork, and I always have. I wouldn't really recommend this as an entryway to the series. I would only say get it if you're already a fan. After that I read The Last Sun by K.D. Edwards, and this is the first book in the Tarot sequence, which is an adult urban fantasy set in a city ruled by the Arcana, who are creatures of immense magical power who are named after the major Arcana tarot cards. And this follows a man called Rune St. John, who is the last remaining heir of the Sun Throne, whose entire family was slaughtered when he was 15. And he is hired to investigate the disappearance of Adam St. Nicholas, who is another Arcana heir, who is the son of Lady Justice. So I love this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. What really makes this book is the characters, especially Rune himself. He is an incredible protagonist. He is really strong and clever, but at the same time incredibly vulnerable. The only character I didn't really like was the main villain of this book, who is kind of weak because they don't really get much screen time, so they don't leave much of an impact on the reader. And the world building is obviously very complex and deep, but it's sort of confusing because Edwards doesn't really ease you into it. He just throws concepts at you and doesn't really explain them until much later. The writing was really good, and especially the action scenes were incredibly intense, but I did have a problem with the structure of the book, because basically what happens is the characters go somewhere, they find a clue, they get attacked by a monster, rinse, repeat. And that's quite annoying. So I didn't like that aspect of it. But the story itself was incredibly interesting and intriguing, and there were some very intriguing mysteries set up for later in the series. So I'm really looking forward to the next one. I will say that multiple characters in this book have a history of sexual assault as minors, so I would be aware of that before going into it. And finally, the last book I read in March was Magic's Pawn by Mercedes Lackey. And this is the first book in the Valdemar the Last Herald Mage series, which is part of the overall Valdemar world. Now, I read this for the Bookie Trials Royal Weekender, so I read it in 2 days, and I'm really glad I did because I loved it. Now, I'm going to start by reading the official synopsis of this to you, and then I'm going to explain why it makes me absolutely furious. Okay? Though Vaniel has been born with near-legendary abilities to work both herald and mage magic, he wants no part of such things, nor does he seek a warrior's path, wishing instead to become a bard. Yet such talent as his, if left untrained, may prove a menace not only to Vaniel, but to others as well. So he is sent to be fostered with his Aunt Seville, one of the famed herald mages of Valdemar. But strong-willed and self-centered Vaniel is a challenge which even Seville cannot master alone. For soon he will become the focus of frightening forces, lending his raw magic to a spell that unleashes terrifying weir hunters on the land. And by the time Seville seeks the assistance of a Shinaïn adept, Vaniel's wild talent may have already grown beyond anyone's ability to contain, placing Vaniel, Seville, and Valdemar itself in desperate peril. What a load of crap. That's not what this book is about at all. First things first, this synopsis is just filled with spoilers. And, oh my god. So, this book is actually about a boy called Vaniel, who is the son of a lord. And Vaniel is very effeminate and non-combative, and he has no interest in warfare and just wants to be a bard. And so, his father kicks him out of his house and sends him to stay with his aunt as a last resort because he doesn't know what to do with him. That's what it's actually about. So yeah, you heard right. This is about a character who is kicked out of his life by his father for being gay, pretty much. And that leads me on to why I love this book so much, and why I gave it 4.5 stars. And one of those reasons is because it is extremely gay. So Vaniel is very soft and gentle and effeminate and non-combative, and he constantly feels like he's doing something wrong, but no one will tell him what it is. He's uncomfortable around women and girls, and he doesn't understand why, and just... Oh. The synopsis of this book focuses on the fantasy aspects, but really this book is a story about Vaniel accepting himself, which is masquerading as a fantasy book. The fantasy aspects really aren't that important to the story, honestly. And I'm sorry I'm being so incoherent about this. I'm gonna try and sort out my thoughts, but it's just an incredible book and I highly recommend it. Just read it, whatever. Yeah, it's a beautiful representation of repressed queerness, the world building is great, the writing is great, the plot is really unpredictable and has so many twists and you don't see where it's going. Like, I started out thinking I was going to give it 5 stars, and then it slows down a bit in the middle, and I thought I was going to give it 3.5, but then it picks up again towards the end, and I wanted to give it 5 stars again, but because of the middle I felt like I couldn't, so I ended up settling on 4.5. I did have a couple of problems with this. I thought the romance was rushed, but I will say that that's not as important to the story as it first appears. And the world building is a bit confusing, I think because Mercedes Lackey is sort of writing under the assumption that you have read the previous books in the Valdemar world, which I haven't, so it took me a while to understand everything. But yeah, the characters are great. Vaniel is now one of my favourite protagonists in all of fiction, and I can't wait to read the rest of this trilogy and also dive into the rest of the Valdemar universe. I will give some warnings for suicide, suicide attempts, and suicidal ideation. But yeah, if you can handle that, then I highly recommend reading it. So yeah, that was every book I read in March. I've written notes for almost all of these books, so I'll leave all of those linked in the description. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought about them, so please leave that in the comments below. And also tell me about any books that you read in March that you really enjoyed. Or hated, if that's what you want to do. So yeah, that was my March wrap-up. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Follow me on Twitter or add me as a friend on Goodreads if that's what you want to do. Links to both of those in the description. And I will hopefully have another video up soon. But until then, thank you for watching. I have been Isaac and this has been Books with Ike. Goodbye.